In case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Yeah.
The whole situation surrounding Daniel Ricciardo, for me personally, I think it's quite messy.
I agree 100%. I don't think RB and Red Bull as a parent organization handled this super well. Daniel Ricciardo never really had the opportunity to be a great driver, and a lot of this has to do with timing. But you look at his career on a macro level: 8-time Grand Prix winner, at times was a contender for the Drivers' Championship, never really seemed to have the right car or situation to really compete for a championship. However, when it comes to the hearts of Formula One fans everywhere, he is certainly at the top. People love Daniel Ricciardo, and he has brought so many Formula One fans so much joy. And I think it's because that he wears his heart on his sleeve and shows his emotions in a way that many other Formula One drivers don't. I think it's very interesting that instead of giving him a proper send-off and giving him a farewell tour, he might be done after the Singapore race amid secrecy. We don't know what's going on. They didn't make a formal announcement that was his last race. There's just been rumblings and rumors. And I just feel like Red Bull could have handled this better, because Lord knows they could use the good press.
Let's be critical at the moment. I don't think Daniel Ricciardo has had the greatest season. He was coming into it alongside Yuki Tsunoda. It was basically outperform Yuki Tsunoda, and there's a great chance of a Red Bull seat, which in all fairness, it looked like it was going to happen at the summer break. Daniel and Max left very happy, and then all of a sudden, Sergio Perez is still in the car, and everyone was kind of a little bit shocked, including the drivers themselves. I'm pretty sure I remember seeing Daniel Ricciardo being he just didn't have a very good poker face for the following weekend when they were asking those questions. You could tell that something had happened, and it's just so strange that it's gone from, Daniel Ricciardo is going to be driving for Red Bull for the rest of the season. Let's see how he plays out. If he fails to swim in that scenario as well, then I think it's fair for everyone to say, it's time for him to move on. Let's get that young talent that Red Bull have back up through the order, and whoever came out on top between Lawson and Tsunoda goes into that Red Bull seat for 2025. But yeah, it's just a very, very sticky situation. You've just got way too many people coming up through the ranks, and then you've got also these two corks in the bottle, which are Sergio Perez and Daniel Ricciardo. And yes, it's never nice to be critical of someone and say that they've got to go. No, I hate that. And watching Daniel Ricciardo's interviews just breaks your heart. But we have to be critical at the end of the day. We have to look at things and say, these aren't going the way that they should be. But I do think there's a lot on social media that are kind of taking the mick out of the situation, being, he sucks, he's a bad driver anyway, because of maybe what's happened in the recent years. I don't think we should remember Daniel Ricciardo for what has happened in the last few seasons, but remember him for those incredible drives in the Red Bull days. Coming into the sport, young, fresh face, a couple of seasons, going up against Sebastian Vettel, beating who was the season champion at Red Bull, and pulling off some incredible performances as well as some beautiful overtakes. And I think that's the Ricciardo we should definitely remember, rather than, just pointing and laughing.
Daniel Ricciardo, we know he made some errors in judgment throughout the course of his career. I think everybody agrees that he probably should have never left Red Bull. And that had to do with the fact that Max was starting to sort of challenge him as the number one driver here, and he wanted to go to a team where he was number one. He then went to Renault. Renault was okay until towards the end, and then finally he was getting his groove at Renault. But by the time he had found his form at Renault, he had already agreed to leave and join McLaren. And with the exception of that win at Monza and McLaren, his time at McLaren was not impressive for his standards or for fan standards of Formula One. But it seems like each time he chose to leave, he probably should have stayed wherever he was. I wonder what his career would have ended up like if he had never left Red Bull.
Yeah, certainly is something to speculate and wonder. And it is just a shame. And I think there's so many drivers that do fall through the cracks in Formula One. It's such a competitive sport, and it's also so dependent on where you are. You can be the best driver there, but if you don't time your moves correctly, you're going to just be pushed to the side and remembered as a race winner, which is still an incredible feat. You know, I think more people have been into space than have been race winners in Formula One. So it's still an incredible feat to win a Formula One race. But Daniel Ricciardo came in and has always expressed his ambition and his eagerness to be the greatest, to be on the top step of the championship and to win that. And sadly, I think, you know, after the Red Bull days, it was falling away unless a miracle could happen at McLaren or at Renault. And yeah, as you say, that fairy tale ending has never really got up and running again.
But I agree with you how heartbreaking his press conference was post the Singapore Grand Prix. If you watch that interview and you don't get choked up, then I'm sorry, you don't have a soul. The thought of the unknown must be really hard for him right now.
I think that's the difference between talking about the departure of Logan Sargent. He's still a very young guy and a very talented driver, has done tremendously in junior categories. And whilst I was sad that obviously his dream of being a Formula One driver had ended for Logan Sargent, I still believe that there is a career for him in a lot of other categories, whether he does a Nick de Vries and he goes over towards Formula E or WEC, or he goes over to his American roots and gives IndyCar a crack and really goes and attacks that. It'll be interesting to see what he gets up to. But for Daniel Ricciardo, you know, someone who's already in his 30s, it's a lot more difficult to place him in seats that potentially he can go and have a successful career from, because a lot of teams, in all fairness, across all motorsport, they're really starting to look at young talent. We'll get to it later, but Formula E are starting to really pick young talent from coming through the ranks in Formula 2, Formula 3, Formula 1 junior teams. IndyCar as well, also looking at younger drivers too. So yeah, it is always going to be a worry that some hotshot is going to come in and be a better, more promising offer. But I'm really excited for him, if it is the end, to hopefully get a seat in IndyCar. As I've said, someone I've really started getting into in recent years. I think Daniel Ricciardo would be a great fit over there.
I think he'd be a great fit in IndyCar. I think it'd be a good transition, given it's another open wheel single-seater series. I know he's expressed interest in going into supercars or NASCAR, but I feel like even though IndyCar does not have power steering, I do think IndyCar would be an easier progression from Formula One. We've seen so many Formula One drivers drive an IndyCar and do well. A lot of those spots are already starting to get filled. You wonder, like, okay, let's say Daniel Ricciardo tomorrow wanted to go to IndyCar. There might not be a spot for him there. Maybe there is in NASCAR. I don't know. But I think regardless of what he decides to do, coming to America from a marketing move, not just a sporting move, makes a lot of sense, because Americans love Daniel Ricciardo. And I feel like he fits into the aesthetic and vibe of Americana and sport here in such a seamless way that a lot of other drivers from Europe specifically just don't.
Yeah, I fully agree. And like I say, I'm really, really excited for that to potentially happen.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but we wish him well. If this is his last race in Formula One, excited to see what the next chapter is.